Lila Grayson was never the daughter her parents had dreamed of, and they were never the family she longed for. Born into a world already complete without her, she arrived as an afterthought, a ripple in the pristine pond of her parents' carefully curated life. Her older sister Abigail was the golden child, perfectly poised, effortlessly brilliant, the embodiment of everything Richard and Margaret Grayson had ever wanted. Lila, by contrast, was the shadow they couldn't erase, the unexpected flaw in their flawless design. From her earliest memories she felt it, the cold indifference in her mother's eyes, the dismissive edge in her father's voice. They didn't hate her, not exactly. They just didn't see her not the way they saw Abigail. The Grayson household in suburban Connecticut was a museum of Abigail's triumphs. The Lee VY Ing room walls were lined with framed certificate, science fair VY Tories, honor roll mentions, a scholarship letter from Yale. Margaret would beam as she recounted Abigail's latest achievement to neighbors over coffee, her voice swelling with pride. Richard, a stoic man who ran a small accounting firm, would nod approvingly, his rare smiles reserved for his eldest daughter. Lila, meanwhile, hovered on the edges of these scenes, a silent spectator in her own home. She wasn't unloved, not in the overt dramatic sense of the word. She was simply unnecessary. Her earliest memory of this truth came at 5 years old. It was Abigail's 8th birthday, and the house buzzed with celebration streamers dangling from the ceiling, a cake adorned with 8 flickering candles, and a crowd of giggling children. Lila, small and unnoticed, stood by the kitchen doorway, clutching a crumpled drawing she'd made as a gift. She'd spent hours on it, coloring a picture of her and Abigail holding hands under a rainbow. When she finally mustered the courage to approach, Margaret intercepted her with a distracted glance. "Not now, Lila. This is Abigail's day. Go play somewhere else." The drawing stayed in her hands unseen, until she tore it up later that night, her tiny fingers trembling with a hurt she couldn't yet name. That moment set the tone for her childhood. Abigail was the sun, and Lila was the faint star struggling to be seen in its glare. Margaret once said it outright, her words slicing through the air like a blade. "We already have Abigail. You don't need to try so hard." It wasn't meant to be cruel, just a statement of fact, but it lodged itself in Lila's chest like a splinter. She spent years trying to prove her worth, excelling in school, staying out of trouble, offering quiet acts of kindness, but it was like shouting into a void. Her parents' attention remained fixed on Abigail, their perfect daughter who never faltered. Home wasn't a sanctuary for Lila. It was a stage where she played a bit part, overshadowed by the leading lady. But there was one place where the spotlight found her: her grandparents' house. Every weekend, when Margaret and Richard grew tired of her presence, they'd drop her off at the modest clapboard home of Harold and Evelyn Carter, her mother's parents. There, Lila wasn't a mistake or an inconvenience. She was everything. Harold, a retired math professor with a shock of white hair and a perpetually ink-stained shirt, greeted her with a grin that crinkled his eyes. "There's my little genius," he'd say, pulling her into a hug that smelled of old books and peppermint. Evelyn, soft-spoken and warm, would be in the kitchen, her apron dusted with flour, ready to teach Lila how to knead dough or season a stew. Their home was a refuge, a place where Lila's voice mattered, where her questions were answered, and her presence was cherished. Harold taught her more than math, taught her how to see the world. Sitting at the scratched oak table in his study, he'd guide her through equations, his voice steady and patient. "Numbers don't lie, Lila," he'd say, tapping his pencil against the paper. "They're honest even when people aren't. You can always trust them to show you the truth." Those lessons went beyond algebra or geometry. They became a lens through which Lila began to measure her life, precise, unyielding, revealing the stark reality of her family's neglect. Evelyn, meanwhile, nurtured Lila's soul. She'd sit beside her as she struggled with homework, her gentle hand resting on Lila's shoulder. "Knowledge is yours forever," she'd whisper. "No one can take it away from you." In the afternoons, they cooked together Evelyn's famous chicken pot pie or cinnamon rolls that filled the house with sweetness. Those meals weren't just sustenance, they were love made tangible, a balm for the wounds Lila carried from home. Every night, as she tucked Lila into the guest room's quilted bed, Evelyn would murmur, "You're the best thing we've got, sweetheart." Those words were a lifeline, pulling Lila through the loneliness that awaited her return to the Grayson house. By the time she was 14, Abigail had left for Yale, and Lila dared to hope things might shift. With her sister gone, maybe her parents would finally see her. But the house didn't warm, it grew colder. Margaret stopped cooking dinner, her energy spent on phone calls with Abigail or planning care packages for her dorm. One evening, as Lila lingered in the kitchen, Margaret handed her a spatula and said, "You're old enough now. You'll cook for us from here on out." It wasn't a request, it was an order. Richard chimed in later, his voice flat. "If you're levying here, you've got to pull your weight." Abigail always did. The comparison stung. A reminder that even in her sister's absence, Lila couldn't escape her shadow. She became the invisible caretaker, cooking, cleaning, fading into the background. Her parents didn't thank her. They barely acknowledged her. Richard's occasional remarks, "This chicken's dry," or "the floor's still dusty," were the closest she got to feedback. Margaret's silence was worse, a void that swallowed Lila's efforts whole. Yet she didn't falter. She kept her grades near perfect, juggling schoolwork with household duties, driven by a quiet determination to prove she wasn't the failure they seemed to think she was. Her salvation came at 17, when she earned a full scholarship to Boston University for finance and economics, a feat her grandparents celebrated with a homemade cake and tears of pride. She raced home to tell her parents, breathless with excitement, clutching the acceptance letter. Margaret glanced at it, her lips tightening. "Oh, that's nice, Lila. But we don't have money to help with extras. Abigail's grad school is expensive." Richard didn't even look up from his newspaper. No congratulations, no pride, just a reminder of where their priorities lay. That night, Lila sat in her room, staring at the letter, and made a vow. She'd leave this house, this family, and build a life where she wasn't an afterthought. College was her escape hatch. Boston buzzed with possibility, towering buildings, bustling streets, a world far removed from the suffocating quiet of Connecticut. She threw herself into her studies, fueled by a hunger to succeed on her own terms. The late nights in the library, the grueling exams, the solitude, she embraced it all. Her classmates had parents who sent care packages or called to check in. Lila had only herself. But she didn't mind. She had a goal. Graduate with honors, land a job in finance, and never look back. Her grandparents remained her anchor. Harold mailed her handwritten math problems to solve for fun, each one ending with a note. "You've got this, kiddo." Evelyn sent care packages, cookies, scarves she'd knitted, letters filled with encouragement. They were her tether to love, a reminder that she wasn't alone. When she graduated magna cum laude at 21, they were there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. Her parents didn't come. Margaret claimed a scheduling conflict, and Richard muttered something about work. Lila didn't care. She had her degree, her future, and the only family that mattered. Her first job came quickly, a junior analyst position at Vanguard Financial, a powerhouse in Boston's financial district. She attacked it with everything she had, poring over spreadsheets, mastering market trends, proving her worth. Her colleagues noticed her drive. Her bosses praised her precision. Within 3 years, she climbed to a senior analyst role, leading a team on multimillion-dollar projects. At 25, she bought a sleek apartment overlooking the Charles Rivera sanctuary of glass and light, free from the echoes of her past. But the past wasn't done with her. Abigail's life, once the gleaming centerpiece of the Grayson legacy, began to unravel. Her marriage to Daniel, a charming but aimless graphic designer, faltered under the weight of his unemployment. Their 2 kids drained what little savings they had. Margaret and Richard poured their retirement funds into bailing them out, paying rent, covering preschool tuition, keeping Abigail's perfect image intact. When that ran dry, they turned to Lila. The calls started innocently enough. "Lila, how's work?" Margaret would ask, her tone overly sweet. Then came the shift. "Things are tight here. Abigail's struggling, could you send a little something?" At first, Lila complied, wiring small amounts out of guilt, a lingering hope that helping might earn her a scrap of their affection. But the requests grew. $500 for a car repair, $1,000 for a medical bill, $2,000 to cover a mortgage payment. Each time, she'd ask herself why she owed them anything when they'd given her nothing. Yet she couldn't say no, not fully, not when Evelyn's voice echoed in her mind. Family's the most important thing, Lila. The breaking point came when Harold and Evelyn died within months of each other. Harold from a sudden heart attack at 78. Evelyn from pneumonia 6 weeks later. Their loss gutted Lila, stripping away the only unconditional love she'd known. She buried them in a quiet cemetery outside Hartford, standing alone as the wind whipped through the trees. Her parents attended the funerals but offered no comfort, their focus already shifting back to Abigail's latest crisis. Lila returned to Boston Hollow, the weight of their absence pressing on her chest. In their will, Harold and Evelyn left her a modest inheritance enough to buy a house. She decided to use it for her parents, a final gesture to bridge the gap she'd never crossed. She found a charming colonial in a quiet Hartford suburb, white siding, a wraparound porch, a garden Evelyn would have loved. She poured her heart into it, imagining it as a peace offering, a chance to rewrite their story. When it was ready, she handed over the keys, expecting gratitude, maybe even a flicker of pride. Instead, they turned it into a dagger. A week after the move, Margaret called. "We're throwing a housewarming party," she said, her voice casual. "Just family, you know Abigail's coming with the kids. No need for you to make the trip." Lila's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I bought the house. It's my gift to you." Margaret paused, then sighed. "It's for Abigail, really? She's been through so much. We want her to feel supported." The line went silent as Lila's anger flared. She hung up, grabbed her keys, and drove the 2 hours to Hartford, her hands trembling on the wheel. She arrived to find the house alive with light and laughter, cars lining the street, music spilling from the windows. Inside, Abigail held court, her kids running wild, while Margaret and Richard mingled with neighbors and relatives. Lila stood in the doorway unseen, until she stepped forward and the room froze. "Surprise," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Guess I didn't get the memo," Margaret stammered. "Lila, what are you doing here?" Richard avoided her gaze. Abigail approached, her smile tight. "Let's not make a scene, okay? This is about family." Lila laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Family? I paid for this house. I built this for you. And you can't even envy me." She pulled the deed from her bag, holding it up like a weapon. "This is mine. You don't get to pretend I don't exist." The guests shifted uncomfortably as Lila's voice rose. "I've given you everything, money, time, this house, and you still choose her. I'm done." She turned to the crowd. "Party's over. Get out." Whispers rippled through the room as people filed out, Abigail's kids whining, Margaret pleading. "Lila, please," but she was already gone, the deed clutched in her hand, the weight of years lifting with every step. She sold the house a month later, the transaction swift and final. The money sat in her account, a symbol of her freedom. She cut off contact, no more calls, no more guilt trips. The silence was deafening but liberating. She moved to Seattle, a city of rain and reinvention, taking a director role at a new firm. There she built a life untainted by her pasta circle of friends who saw her. A quiet house filled with books and plants, a future she controlled. Years later, a letter arrived from Margaret, forwarded through her old address. It was an apology, feeble and late, claiming they'd lost their way and wanted to reconnect. Lila read it once, then tossed it into the fireplace, watching the flames consume it. She didn't need their regret. She'd found her worth not in their approval, but in the life she'd forged alone. Lila's story isn't a fairy tale. It's a reckoning, a testament to the strength it takes to walk away from those who diminish you. She learned that family isn't always blood. It's the people who see you who choose you. And in letting go, she found the truest freedom of all.